Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. And welcome back to another episode of Off the Comma. I'm very excited to be here this week for a variety of reasons. And, obviously this is a very, just such a privilege to be able to be in this place and be able to share in these stories with all of our amazing guests. And I feel like, this is important work we do for ourselves. This is important work we do for folks who are listening, who might be inspired by the stories, and also just, being able to show people what it can be like to have conversations where we don't have an agenda or, feel like we need to fix or jump in or anything like that. So it's kind of me rambling a little bit about Off the Comma and why we're here and why I'm here each week. I'm very excited this week because not only do I get to meet someone new whom I haven't met before and learn about her through her story, Maricia is coming to us from my hometown of Fort Worth, Texas, actually. And I'm going to let her introduce herself. But I just had to acknowledge that because how interesting it is to actually be talking to someone sitting in the place where I was born and did a lot of my growing up. And so I'm sure there will probably be some things that come up in her story that I'll be able to resonate with or be like, I know that place. So anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. Maricia, welcome to Off the Comma. And we are so happy to have you here this week. Why don't you tell us about yourself? Start with how would you like to be known, and then tell us anything else that you'd like us to know about you before we get to your story in a little bit.
Well, I'm glad you invited me. And yes, I'm in Fort Worth, Texas. Well, I think I'd like to be known as a mature lifestyle blogger. And when I say mature lifestyle blogger, I always said that we are women of a certain age. And when people ask what is a certain age, it's whatever age you are. But I'd like to be known as that. I think I'm a very likable, warm-hearted person because I try so hard to find the good in everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. Sometimes I'm disappointed about those things. I'm originally from Longview, Texas, which is in East Texas, where the biggest town around is Tyler, and it's maybe 120,000 people in Tyler, and less than that in Longview. I moved to Fort Worth after I graduated from what was then East Texas State University. Then we changed the name to Texas A&M Commerce. Then we're back to East Texas A&M now, which is probably what it should have been. And I came to Fort Worth because, I had employment here, but most of my friends were moving to Dallas. And Dallas was just a little too big for me, so I decided to do Fort Worth. And since you're from Fort Worth, you'll know that even though I moved here every Friday or every Saturday, I was on the then Turnpike to Dallas to be with my friends. So I like children. When I say I like children, I was a school teacher. I was an educator, and I loved high school. That was where my passion lay, was with high school. I've taught many different places. I taught Sunday school. I had third and fourth graders who never left me. I would have big seniors sitting in my little bitty chairs because they didn't want to leave. I taught at the community college, which meant I taught kids that were like 16, 17, all the way to their grandparents. So I think I'm into education, but I am a warm, good-hearted person. I love movies that make me happy in the end. That, those kind of things. My kids say, you know how it's going to end, but I like it. I like it to wrap up and somehow or another we're all happy.
Mm, I so appreciate you sharing these things. And like I'm hearing, obviously a passion for teaching and also it sounds like an enjoyment of being with people who are learning at all phases of life, it seems like.
I think that you can learn something anywhere. There are so many things in Fort Worth. I used to tell my students, I said, there are so many things in North Texas that you can do without a lot of money. A lot of it
Hmm.
back then was free, and most people have added something to it, but it's a lot of things. And I remember a little boy telling me he didn't have time, he didn't have the finances to take his girlfriend out. I said, go to the cultural district, and you
Hmm.
can go through the exhibits, the permanent collection for no money. And he was like,
Mm.
really? I was like, it's a whole bunch of things you can do. You can learn from anything. You can be sitting at a Christmas parade and you can learn about some band that came from somewhere, some organization. You don't really have to watch the news because young people don't watch the news, but it's just so many things that you can do. And even at my age, I still try to go out and see certain things. They have a lot of movies done here in North Texas now. If you want to
Mm.
get your chance, you can. I know Yellowstone, they were looking for extras. And
Oh,
they told you how much they were going to pay. They didn't tell you how long you were going to be out there, which was a sticking point with me because it was hot during the summer. But you could go out there and see different people. A lot of people saw, different movie stars and stuff. So there's always something to do.
I so appreciate that. And I agree with you so much, right? Like, there's always things to do that aren't going to cost a lot of money. And you don't have to wait for or be dependent upon whether or not the museum has a free day or a free collection or whatever. Cause like, even if that museum isn't free, you can walk around the building and appreciate the
Mhm.
building. You can look at the grounds and so forth.
Mhm.
It's kind of like a lesson for life, isn't it? Right?
It
Like
is.
if that door's maybe closed or too expensive to open for you right now, well, what can you do around the building, right?
Mhm.
Find your own free. I love that.
Well,
Thank you for.
everywhere I go, it's so funny. I tell people I find my people, and they were like, "What is that?" I said, "I find the Black History Museum."
Hmm.
Every place I've gone, I found them, and my best ones have been in towns that have this itty bitty little house that they turned into a museum. And I wind up staying there probably half a day because they tell me things about it. I love
Mm.
college campuses because they take on a personality. Some that I tell my students, especially, I said, some that I get to, I was like, no, this is not me. I said, but then some I think, oh, I would love to go here. But no matter if I liked it or disliked it, the way made me feel, I always find a child, a student that it says, this is the best place in the world to be. So
Mm.
they fit you. When my students would tell me they didn't know where they wanted to go to college, I tell them you need to try to visit. If you can visit, you can envision yourself that it may be a small school, it may be a huge school, but you kind of feel your way there.
I keep hearing this element of learning, being open
Mhm.
and taking learning you can get from any situation. It's not always just about the feel good, right? I'm really looking forward to seeing how some of these things unfold in your story. Before we get to your story and the 5 questions here in a moment, Maricia, one of the things that I do with each of my guests is as you think ahead to the next 40 minutes or so and the telling of your story today, what intention would you have for yourself?
The intention is to let people who are maturing, because I hate the word aging, who are maturing, let them know that life does not stop. If you are retired, life does not
Mm.
stop. If you're still working, life does not stop. And there is no set pattern to maturing. Everybody does it differently,
Mm.
and it's no right or wrong way to do it. I saw something this morning about back to teaching again about a lady who wanted a school, an elementary school built in this place called Tool, Tool, Texas, that had less than 3,000 people in it.
Mm.
She wanted an elementary school built in that town. And her reasoning was one that most people probably wouldn't think about. She would hear the school bus come by at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the babies had to be on the school bus to ride
Mm.
hours to the elementary school. And her goal was to get an elementary school there. They now have one. She didn't think it was fair.
Oh.
If you're catching the bus at 6, you were up probably at 5. and they were babies. So, and
Mm.
everybody has a different thing because she's 94, I think 95, something like that. And she was still just living her life to the fullest. You may not want to do the same things you did at 20, 30, 40, or whatever, but it's okay. Everything is okay. Again, there is no
Mm.
set pattern.
And what I also heard is if there's something you think you want, just ask. Yeah, I love that. I hear your intention, and my intention is to support you in that by holding space for your storytelling today. And that the two of us today, in bringing your story forward, there will be people out there who hear your story and they will see a little bit of themselves in you and the things that you share. They'll feel a little bit more connected, a little less alone, and in the best of cases, feel even inspired or empowered to do something they've been wanting to do.
I hope so.
Yeah, for sure. Let's jump in. Okay, Maricia, the first question. Where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
Probably, and I thought about this one a little bit, probably all the way back to when I was in college, a junior in college. And I remember it was Christmas, and my dad got up. He held a lot of different jobs. He was an educator. He taught school. He was a coach. He was a referee for the SWAC, which is where the historically Black colleges play. And he also worked for Mr. Bramley. He got up and went to work and never came home. He died at work. And when he died at
Mm.
work,
Mm.
I was, like I said, I was in college. I think I was a junior in college. And I can remember those days, but the comma was I decided at that moment that I would not ask my mom for frivolous things because we had gone from a 4 or 5 check family to a 1 check family because my mom taught school also. So she still
Mm.
had a household to run. My sister was 6 years younger than me, so she was still at home. And I saw her take it on. She didn't pause. I did because I was like, what are we gonna do? And I can remember telling her, well, I'm gonna transfer
Mm.
from the college where I was so I can be closer to home. And she was like, why? You go on and do your life. So I paused on that comment, and I think at that moment I was 19 and I grew up. I became my own person. I was working at the school as student assistant, so I was probably making minimum wage. But at that moment, I decided I can pay for this. And I would always send her, the tuition things and that. And so I would pay this. I can't remember what I paid for it probably was either tuition or books. I know it wasn't room and board because that was more than I could afford. But I would not ask her. And I think I paused because I was trying to say, am I still a little girl? Because I was my dad's apple of his eye. I was like, was I still a little girl or was I growing?
Mm.
And I paused on that and I decided that I was growing. I was growing up and I needed to take on more responsibility than I had. And I'll tell you one thing that tickles everybody because
Mm.
I told them I probably would have had a different car if my dad had lived. But my mom took me because she was tired of coming to pick me up at school. She took me and I sat in, I remember the name of it,
Mm-hmm.
Buckstaff Plymouth Dodge. And I had a car. She bought me a new car, 4 doors, and it only had the AM radio in it. And I remember the guy said, well, she needs an FM AM. And my mom was like,
Mm-hmm.
why? He said, well, when she's out at night, she doesn't have to be out at night. She should not be out at night. So it was one of those things. And that story led to a lot of different things because when I finally left, I got a job at the school after I graduated. And I became a graduate assistant because I was working on my master's at the time. And my parents had told each of their children they would give us 4 years. And in those 4 years, we didn't have to really pay for anything unless we were crazy enough to make a bill out. And so since
Mm-hmm.
I was still there, I graduated in 3 years. I turned out and I got a job as a graduate assistant. So I made more money. And making more money gave me more responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember they got ready for graduation. And I told my mom what day graduation was. And she said, I've seen you graduate because she saw me get my bachelor's. She said, you have a job waiting for you in Fort Worth. So you need to go there. So I didn't march when I got my master's, but I used to tell the kids, I said, she
Mm,
gave me two of everything, two plates, two knives, two forks. And I was like, I might have a party or something. She was like, well, then you'll buy your own. But what got me was when I left, when I drove off, I had one other thing. I had the payment book for the car. Because when I graduated, that she gave me that, it was now my
mm,
responsibility. She paid up until that point. So and that made me grow up because you have to pay this car note and an apartment rent and all that. And money looks good on paper until you're paying bills. So I think that's when I paused. I think,
hmm
and I probably paused for way longer than most people had. And I would always tell people, I don't think we were spoiled children
mm,
because we lived out in the country. We didn't even live in the city limits of Longview. And there were things that my parents just were not going to do. That they would tell when they said no, they meant no. It was no, can I, can I, can I? No, it was no. But my
mm.
mom and my dad always took us places where, to show us things. So I think that's where I got my love of learning from, that we went to different places and did things. And most of
Mm.
it did not cost us a lot of money.
It sounds like I'd love to, if I could, just kind of acknowledge and reflect some of what you shared. Um, just acknowledging, first of all, this comma, this particular example, one that happened at a very early and formative period of your life.
Mhm.
It sounds like the comma you're describing became very much a shift or a transition, right? From, as you said,
Mhm.
to being your daddy's little girl to now I grew up and now I'm going to support my mom and take
Mhm.
care of my responsibilities. And I hear, and when I reflect, correct me wherever I'm off base, because it's just kind of what I think I heard, but this like sense of emerging and growing resourcefulness and responsibility in this shift and in this transition.
I think it is. And my mom was a wonderful role model for me because she never missed a beat after my dad died. I know some people say, well, they've never written a check, they've never done this, they don't buy the groceries and so forth. My mom was doing a lot of things before my dad died. And she just never missed a beat. I remember. Okay, it was during the break of Christmas break, but school started out said the next week. And my mom went right back to work. And I was like, you're going to go back to work so soon? And she said, third graders, little children bring you back to reality really fast.
Mhm.
And I can remember going back to school. And I don't know how they knew in the office where I worked, but they knew. And, I went on back to work. And like she told me, I said, well, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to do this and do that. She said, no, you have a responsibility to yourself. Life goes on. It's not a thing that we look forward to, but life goes on. And like I said, she was my best role
Mm.
model. She still had my sister at home, so my sister had to have a normal childhood. And this is one thing that got me. My brother, who is 6 years older than me, lives in Canada, and he's lived there forever. And we would always send things for my sister. We would send money and we would do this. And my mom said, why do y'all keep doing that? And we like, she doesn't have a father. She doesn't have a daddy. And my mother looked at her. She said, it's nice y'all send those things, but you don't have one either.
Mm.
You all had one. And he was a good role model for all of us. He worked hard. So yeah, I think that it taught me, it made me know that being an adult, you kind of have to shift things around. You shift
Mm.
responsibilities.
Before I get into the second question, I think I'd love to hear kind of at that moment when you're going through this period of transition and growing up and taking on the responsibility, like what were you feeling at that point? You feeling towards your mom, feeling towards your dad who's now passed, feeling towards yourself? Like what was that like for you?
Um, I've always told people that I think it's okay if you question God because He is. your father. You might not like the answer that you get, because I questioned God. I
Mm.
was like, my dad, all he ever did was go to work, come home, take care of his kids. He took care of other people's kids. He was that coach that drove other people's children to college or took them around and did those things. And I asked, why take him? And, so and so has a father that doesn't do anything. And God said, why not? Why not? And so my dad went to see his parents. They lived in the same town we did. He went to see them every day. He was their baby. He was the
Mhm.
youngest of the 4 children that they had. With my mom, like I said, she taught me resilience. She taught me that you can do whatever comes your way. It's not always fun. It's not always hard. It's just life. And
Mhm.
so I learned too that I needed to step up. I don't think she would have denied me anything. She would have tried to go out and get it, but why do that when I know that I could do it on my own? And again, like I said, my sister was at home, and as she grew up, school starts to cost more. She was a senior in high school. They get the pictures and the class rings and all that. That starts to close. That starts to grow.
Mhm.
And as I thought about my parents, they were like most people of that time. There was not like an investment of money or things like that. Um, so you had to know how to handle the money that you did have. And my
Mhm.
mother was very good at that. And as my sister grew up, my mother became more into her own, because she'd always wanted to travel. So she went back to her sorority and she started to travel more. So
Mhm.
she was able to do some of the things that she had wanted to do also.
Mhm. I there's always a point in every episode, because as you're telling your story, there's a lot of folks who can hear your story and be like, yeah, I know what that's like. I know what she means. And kind of the human nature of it all is kind of make assumptions about,
Mhm.
what's going on for you and so forth based on what you've shared so far. And what I'm curious about is, like, at that point, it sounds like your motivation for stepping up and taking on more and becoming responsible. This is the assumption part. I want to hear what it meant for you to support your mom, to support yourself, both, something else. What was really driving that deep internal need to step up?
I think resilience, because I supporting my mom was only, the mental and physically. It was not monetarily, because she was okay in that point. But it was just for her to be there. When one day we told her, the three of us, in all our wisdom, told
Mhm.
us, well, you don't ever need to get married again, because we had a father, you had a husband, and then we thought one day, our sister is not going to be here forever.
Mm,
She's going to leave, and she did. She left and went to Iowa. Uh, and so, it's okay. And I remember my mom said, I didn't need your permission.
mm,
That permission was not needed. But I think it was just the idea to let her know that if she needed, that we would be there, because they had always been there for us. I don't know, and I don't know if when people have children, somehow or another they have this inner feeling if something is wrong or
mm,
whatever. And I think that's what I had with her. It was, I'm going to say, I was maybe not the closest person to her, probably my sister was.
mhm,
But when I would go home before my sister graduated, I would get up in the morning, make coffee. If you remember that percolator,
mhm,
I make coffee, and my mother liked coffee. And we would drink coffee and talk. And that became our time, because my sister would be knocked out in her room. But we would get up early, like 6:30 or 7 o'clock, and drink our coffee, because she and my dad had let me drink coffee as a child. And we would just talk about whatever. And I think that was good for her, and it was good for me, because it was our time. If
mhm.
my sister happened to get up and came back there, which she rarely ever did, it was okay. But that little part, that hour in there, was for us.
Mm. Maricia, let me ask the second question. I feel like you've kind of already answered this to some degree, but feel free to
Mhm.
add whatever else. As you look back at this story you've been sharing with us and this comma that you sat on, what did it create for you?
It created for me the opportunity and the knowledge that when I do step out on my own, I will be okay. My mother always said that it was a difference between
Mm,
families that raised boys and those that raised girls, or a combination. My mother had always told us that you need to be able to take care of yourself. That was what she pushed to my sister and I. You need to be able
mm,
to take care of yourself. You may get married and you may not get married. If you get married, it may last, it may not last, but you don't have the luxury of not doing. So I think it created in me not necessarily an urgency in that, but it was a learning experience because I knew that, when I did graduate, I would be on my own for a while. I would have my own place to live. I would have to take up things, and bringing my mother up or somebody to come up and help me do certain things, that was not an option. The option was you're going to have to do it for yourself.
mm,
And I think that was the thing that made me grow up a little bit
mm,
faster than some people. And I know people will say, well, you were in college, you should have already been grown. Well, to a certain extent, yes, but I still depended on my folks up until that time. You send the tuition bill home, you send the books home, you want to go here, you do those, you send that thing home. If I wanted to do something like my sorority sisters and I decided we were going to
mm.
Grambling State University, which was a fair distance. And we stopped through and talked to my mom. And she says, okay, y'all have a good time. I'm gonna keep you in prayer. And we went on to Grambling, Louisiana.
Hmm. Well, and it sounds to me like everything that you've shared was true. And like you've talked about resilience and we've talked about resourcefulness and responsibility, but also a little bit of like freedom, autonomy, and independence that comes with having created this for yourself, right? This ability to be self sufficient.
And see, people, they have all these things now, all these gadgets where they can keep up with everybody, know where everybody is, and everybody has a phone. So back then, you had to physically call somebody, and if they weren't there, they may have an answering machine or whatever. But I think it was a lot of resilience, and I think as a female, that resilience catapulted me into knowing I could stay by myself. I
Hmm.
could live by myself in the big city of Fort Worth.
Mm. I want to acknowledge you too, because you said something that I don't know that I hear talked about a lot, but this distinction between raising boys and raising girls. Now, I have never had kids. I didn't raise kids. So there's not a whole lot I get to comment on, but I can speak as an observer. And since most of my friends are women and having grown up in a household of only boys, I'm only going to say that I have witnessed the difference between how boys are raised and girls are raised in households of that era. And that's all I can speak to, kind of our age and so forth.
And it is that era because things have changed.
Mm,
Things have changed a lot, but it is that era. And I saw it. Not only was my brother the only boy that my parents had, he was the only boy on my dad's side of the family.
mm,
So we always said he was the golden child, he was supposed to do this, that, and the other. And everybody else kind of just fell in or whatever. And as we've matured, we know that that was not true, but he was the namesake. He carried the name. We didn't
mm,
carry the name. If we got married, we didn't carry the name. So it is a little different. And I think even today it is a little bit different. I have two grandchildren, but the boy is, even as a child, he was just rough.
mm,
He wanted to play rough. It was that kind of thing. And as he's grown, I tell him, I said, you just get rougher. But it is a difference, and it depends on how you were raised. My mom was the oldest in her family, and her mom died when she was like 12. So she
Mm,
sort of became the mom until my grandfather remarried, and that was probably when she was like maybe 14. But she
hmm.
was the woman of the house, and you could see it when her brothers all came back to East Texas. You could see it. They depended on her.
Well, and sounds like she carried some of that experience and those ways of thinking and
Hmm.
being into the family that she created and has since passed a lot of that down to you as well.
Hmm.
Mm. Let me ask you the third question as you look back at the comma that you've been telling us about. What have you learned about yourself as a result of sitting on that comma?
I learned that I can do more than I thought I could.
Mm.
I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Because like I said, I can remember that day really well in my head, the day my dad died. I can remember that, and it's just etched in my mind. Um, but I also realized that I was prepared for a lot of things that I did not know I was prepared for, because almost 20 years to the date, my mom passed. But before she
Mm.
passed, I was the one that went home, to see about her, to do those things, because I lived in Fort Worth, which was back then roughly 2.5, 3 hours away from Longview. My sister lived in Iowa and my brother was in Canada. So I would go
Mm.
back to help out. And it wasn't a long time, because from the diagnosis until the time she passed was probably less than 6 weeks. But I became that person. And I remember I taught this class, well, back when you were younger and I was younger, it was probably general business. And I taught
Mm-hmm.
this class,
Mm-hmm.
which I loved. My favorite teacher taught it. I loved. And I remember going back to work after my mom had passed. And I would tell my kids, we're going to talk about this, because this is something that you will have to learn in the long run. You don't want to learn it. And I said, when I can get myself together, I'll tell you how much it costs, the budgeting, why you need life insurance and so forth. And I did. And I learned that I could talk about it. And I learned that it was a learning experience for them also. In that 20 years, how much things had changed. And we were,
Mm-hmm.
since we were from a small town, you you have these things set aside already? Do you have, the gravesite? How much money is this going to cost? And the kids would say, that costs you? Yeah, it costs you. All of this costs you. And it's up to you to decide. So I think it taught me to be stronger in that, and to use life as a learning experience. And
Mm.
I think I did a pretty good job with my kids, because I brought in everything. I had everything that we had purchased for my dad, and I had everything that we had purchased for my mom. And we always talk about it now. My sister was the writer, because she didn't want to go in and do any of that. And so my brother and I had to
Mm.
go in and do all of that. And I learned that I could
Mm.
do it. It was just part of life.
It also seems like kind of from that point, and perhaps even before that
Mhm.
period of I had to grow up, but for sure since that point, like you carry that forward in everything. We've been talking about teaching and learning and what you can take, and I don't mean that in like a hostile way, but what you can take or gain, right, from all life's experiences. And you just continue to describe how, well, yeah, because I had learned this, then it helped in this situation. And because I had experienced that, I was able to pass that knowledge on and explain that. And just this, like all these fruits that you had picked through your life's experiences, you were constantly able to pull from that basket.
I think most people do. They have a basket that they pull from. They don't know they're doing it, but in retrospect, they are. Like I said, you can learn anything from any situation. And I keep talking about my mom a lot, because she was one of my biggest influences. She would say, if you just sit there and be quiet, you will learn something. And you do. It may
Mm,
only be that you learn, oh, that I don't really like this person sitting next to me because they said blah, blah, blah. Or you may pick up on something. As children, when we were younger, we were not allowed to be around grown-ups when they were talking because you had your child's
Mm,
place. But you would pick up little tidbits as you passed through there or whatever. So I think
mm.
that you can always learn something from somebody.
Nice. Let's jump into the fourth question. And obviously you can continue to go back and forth as more parts of the story, you feel like you want to share more parts of the story or there's something you haven't covered. The fourth question is, so what has changed for you as a result of sitting on that comma?
I think what has changed for me is that before that comma, I was my parents' middle child. And I always said the middle child is the child that gets
Mm,
nothing. And people laugh. I said, see, the first one, they get everything because they're so excited. The last one gets a lot because they're tired. I said,
mm,
the person in the middle, they kind of learned that, you can't have this or you can't do this. Again, I think I learned how to grow up, how to take responsibility. When my mom was diagnosed with her illness, I remember sitting there with her and she told me, she said, you can call your brother, but I don't want him to come until I tell him to come. And so being a person, the
mm,
person I was like, okay, I'll do what she says do. And I remember that my aunt said she had a bad night because I come back to Fort Worth. My aunt said she had a bad night and that she was hallucinating. She thought she was still in her classroom.
mm,
And I called my brother that morning and I told him, I said, you don't have to come for her, but you have to come for me. I need you to come home now. And he did. He said,
mm,
I'm on the next thing out of here. And he did. But as I think I knew what was going to happen because I had talked to a friend that was a nurse and she had walked me through these things. I knew what was going to happen, about when it was going to happen. But at that moment, I knew that I was going to become the woman of our family, just the three of us. I was going to become
mm,
not the mother because I think everybody had a mother and she had taught us well. But since I was the closest around, I was
mm,
the one that was going to have to take the responsibility of doing certain things while they were away because they both had jobs there. So I think again, I just grew up at that moment. I grew up with my father when he passed, and my mother taught me. She taught us how to react and how to grow when she passed. Because as a child, I remember telling her,
mm,
oh,
mm,
I hope I die before you do, because it will kill me. And she said, that's not God's plan. That's not the nature of things. And she
mm,
was one that used to always tell us, it's already written. Our time is short. We just don't know when and
mm,
how.
mm,
And so I think sitting on that comma
mm,
back then taught me that I could do a lot of things because with my mom, with my grandmother and grandfather on my dad's side, there was always somebody that we wanted to take care of. Because at the time, my dad had only one surviving son, and brother, and he lived in California. So we took care of our grandparents. And my grandfather died before my
mm.
mom, but my grandmother died after my mother. And so we were the ones that had to, my sister and I, we were the ones that had to take care of everything. So I think it's just that I knew I was going to have to do it. And as they say, I put my shoes on and I did it.
Mm. Prepared and kind of ready. You've talked about these things. And what it seems like I'm noticing, and you tell me if I'm off base here, but you haven't used the word love, but the way you describe tending to all these things, your own needs, tending to teaching your children, tending to your mother and her passing, certainly the way you describe your relationship with your dad and your siblings. Like I'm hearing prepared, ready, grown up, taking care of things, but it sounds like with
Mhm.
love.
And you
Mm,
have to, if you don't love that person or love somebody, and there are a lot of people who said they don't love anybody. We were not the family where, the parents are going to hug and do all that in front of the kids, that was not it. And I tell everybody, I said, how I knew that my mother loved my dad without her saying it. This was pre-microwave time. And like I said, my
Mm-hmm.
dad was a referee, a football referee. So, and we didn't have a historically Black college in my hometown. So he would have to go different places. And my uncle would always laugh. He said, he's not going to stay away from home. He's going to make it home to y'all. So I would hear him, we would eat dinner. My mom was always sure that we always ate dinner together. And she would wrap his up, in that plate and that foil and put it in the oven. And I could hear when he came home, it might be 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. I would hear her get up and open the door for him and warm the food up, and they would talk for a
Mm.
while. So it was always the love was always there. It may not have been spoken as much back then, but I think again that's a generational thing. That was the
Mm.
time. Even though there was Leave It to Beaver and all that, most of my neighborhood didn't do that. But you would see it. You would see the love that they had. My dad I rode with him in junior high because he taught me math 2 times, and I prayed to God he would not teach me again because I didn't like math. But for
Mm-hmm.
the 3 years I was in junior high, I rode with him every day. And every day we stopped by to see his mom and his dad. Without fail, we were going to stay. We were going to stay maybe 10, 15 minutes. He would drink a cup of coffee with them, and then he would go to work. So I knew he loved them. He was concerned about them. When one of his older brothers died who lived in Fort Worth, he told me, he said, you're not going to school tomorrow. I was still in junior high. He said, you're going to ride the train with your grandmother. He said, and then we'll be up
Mm.
on the weekend, but you're going to go with her. So I had that responsibility. And, I love them both dearly. When my grandfather, he was so funny, and he never thought he was funny. He was a quiet spoken man, but they would like their room. I never knew my grandparents to sleep in the same room. My grandmother had this
Mm-hmm.
huge, and when I said that, I mean my dad's folks. She had
Mm-hmm.
this huge bedroom, and he had this tiny little bedroom. But she could, in her bed, she would be looking directly at him. And when we were younger, they had 2 rocking chairs in there, so they would sit by the heater. But as they got older,
Mm.
they got recliners that would help push you up. And I never asked why they never, slept together. It was his room. You go to Papa's room or Mima's room, but I know that it was love there. And as he got sick, she would cut his hair. She would change his clothes, and we would laugh because we would go over and he would have this sports jacket on. And she said, doesn't he look handsome? And we all go, he looks hot, because she would dress him up. But that was her way of showing him love. And when he
Mm-hmm.
passed away, my sister and I were on either side of her because we knew that when she went up there to take the last glimpse, she was going to fall out. She didn't. She reached over there and
Mm.
she rubbed his face and his head. She said, I was good to him while he was here. And she was, but it
Mm.
was no, I love you. And they had been married forever because they got married when she was 13 and he was 16 or 17. So they had been married forever, but it was not said, but it was shown.
Yeah. Well, and that's like obviously things that you're sharing are already resonating with me, right? Because, there's some similarities in terms of family dynamics and how you show affection
Mhm,
and love and care and so forth. And I talk to like friends of mine sometimes, especially as they're taking care of older
mhm,
parents and they're going through that phase where it's not always pretty, it's
mhm,
not always easy, it can be very difficult, and a lot of things can go through your
mhm,
mind. And I do talk to folks about the separation of the feelings from the actions,
mhm,
and like just because you may not necessarily say certain things or withhold expression
mhm,
of certain feelings or whatever, like you can still show that
mhm.
in the actions that you take, the care that you give to the things that you do, even if they sometimes are like responsibilities or obligations or what have you. And that's what I'm hearing so much in all of your stories is like this level of care
It is.
in the
It
responsibility.
is. And I'll tell you another thing. When my grandmother on my dad's side, she had dementia toward the end of her life. So she had to be put into a facility. And that was another thing. You have
Mm-hmm.
to run around and do all these things. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember she always worked for somebody, some people. She would work for somebody. And if truth be told, if I was in the grocery store, it would just kind of get on my nerves that people who were younger than me would call her by her first name. And I would just, but
Mm.
that's what their parents did. But when I went home and I would go visit her in the facility, it might be a television, it might be a new pair of house shoes, and I would ask who bought them. And they would say, oh, so and so, your grandmother worked for their parents and they came by to see it. So it it was something that they felt for her that I didn't see when I was younger. I still
Mm-hmm.
didn't know the majority of them, but it was like there would always be something there. And she didn't know
Mm.
who gave it to her. And they said, oh, John Smith came because your grandmother used to work for the Smiths. And so the kids came by to see her and they said she was happy, this, that, and other. We don't know if she remembered them or not, but it's that kind of thing. Yeah. And again, you go back and it's the circle of life. You can't go back to what happened in the 60s, the 50s, and the 60s and compare it to now.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? It's, I'm an over like self-reference, but it's like it's important that we go back and we see those things because they teach us very many things, but you can't go back and recreate it. And you can't go back and relive it. It's important to live forward. I love everything that you're sharing with us in these tales. I can see, how important your family, all of your family is to you and how seriously you took the role that you played in your family, the different roles that you played at different times with your family, and then all the things that you took from your family along the way. I can see the importance of that. Last question before we start to wrap up, because we could talk more, and I know there's many, many, many more tales in there that I would love to hear. What does getting off the comma look like for you?
Getting off the comma means you're probably going to have another comma
Mm,
or or semicolon or something before you put that period. Because I think that you put the period when you're no longer here.
hmm
The comma means that you're going to, if you've seen those sentences that have a lot of commas or they have a semicolon or the colon, something else happens. And so I think that's what has happened to me. The thing about life, it's changed. And even though you can't go back into the 60s or the 70s, being a woman of a certain age, our lives have changed. I am not my mom. I am not my grandmother. My kids will not be me. They are very strong-willed. And I think that we nurtured that strong will in them. Their father and I, we nurtured that because, again, I sat down and I told them, if you get married, that's fine. If you don't, because I have one that's not married, and people always want to know, when did she get married? I go like, I don't know. It's her decision if and when. But I think we taught them to be resilient, that so that they will be able to do the things that they want to. I hope that getting off that comma just keeps going until I probably have the longest sentence. I'm going to have this paragraph that has nothing in it. It's going to be just long and one period at the end. And that's it.
hmm
They always tell you that your life is led between this and this, the dash or whatever. I think as we mature, maybe we won't do the things that we said we were going to do, or we might. Again, like I told you, my dream trip was to Italy. I was going to eat and drink my way through. Found out I was lactose intolerant before I went to Italy,
Mm.
but I was able to eat because they don't do their cheese like we do. But it's if you want to do things, you can. I always tell people, whatever you want to do, if you want to be a rocking grandmother, that's fine. I know people that say, I don't want my, ooh,
Mhm.
I just want to keep them every day. I don't. I don't. But when I do, I want it to be the best experience. My grandson yesterday turned 16. I stayed up the day before so that I could be the first person at 12:01 a.m. to wish him happy birthday. And he was not up, but I wanted to be the first person to wish him happy birthday. Um, I
Mhm.
want to enjoy him because in 2 years he'll be away from home and nobody's have it anymore. But like I said, I think getting off the comma meant that there were more commas, more punctuation to come, and that I was going to do them into the period.
Mm. I love that. I love that. Many commas before we stop, right? Wonderful. Well, there's certainly so much more we could cover. Let's go ahead and kind of wrap things up. Maricia, if people wanted to hear more and talk to you, reach out, connect, or just see what you're up to, where can they find you? I'll put all of your links in the show notes so people can find them. Tell us where to go looking.
I tell people you can find us everywhere. We have a website, and everything is always "This is your best year," and that's one word. We ran it all together. You can find us on all social media except TikTok because I have not figured out why I need to be on TikTok. But as my daughter told me, she said, "Mom, it's not your demographic." She said, "Your demographic, when they find something, they stick with it." So most of the time, you'll find us on Facebook. We do have like a page for our blog on Facebook. And we also have a group page. And if you want to join us, you have to go in and answer a few little questions. But you can find us on our website also. ThisisyourBestYear.com.
Nice. Wonderful. Well, I definitely encourage everyone to check you all out and to sign up. And now let's go to the last piece. And I do this in every episode because obviously I believe that, there's so much value and there's so much that we as people can gain by listening to each other's stories and having the opportunity to tell stories without somebody else's agenda. And it's about lifting up voices. And I don't believe your story would be complete if we didn't give you an opportunity to lift up other voices. And so I call this section acknowledgments. And it's an opportunity for you to look at your sphere of influence and give a voice to or boost or lift up other voices. That could be causes, organizations, other creators. It could be important people in your life or circle of friends. Who would you like to acknowledge today? And I'll make sure we put all of their information in the show notes as well.
Oh, there's so many, but probably, not counting my family, probably I'll start with Monica Anderson. I taught her. And then we became sorority sisters, and there's 10 years difference in our ages. And then we became friends. She's that person. She's a blogger, she's a journalist, she's a YouTuber, she's a dentist, she's a mom, she's a grandmother, but she is a survivor. She is a cancer
Mm.
survivor, and she walks people through that. And when I first started blogging, I was like, oh, and she was like, no, you're a blogger. You tell people you're a writer. And so she let me know that it was all right to give myself that title. So I
Mm-hmm.
did. Another person is Jill Darden. When I was working in public school, I became the career and tech coordinator at a high school. And I told her, I said, Jill, my parents will not buy the Star Telegram, which was the paper at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, but they will pick up your paper. Can I write an article for you about, the testing and all this stuff? She said, sure. And for the next couple of years, I wrote a monthly column for her and I enjoyed it. And so we still have this relationship that she'll say, hey, are you busy? Can you go do this for me? And our biggest thing was we got to cover something at the Super Bowl. Ruby Powell. Have you
Actually, if I
ever?
may, just because I want to make sure that we acknowledge this, Jill Darden is the editor of the Fort Worth Black News,
Yes,
and we hadn't
Fort Worth
stated
Black
that. I
News.
want to make sure we say that and give that
Okay.
credit.
And
Yeah.
and I can go back to Monica. Monica is the founder of Drop the Drugs Foundation. Drop the
Mm.
Drugs.
Okay. All right.
Um,
Ruby.
Ruby Powell is a anesthetician, but that's not how I got to know her. I got to know her through church. We sat next to each other, and then we got to talking. I'm from Longview. She's from Tyler. She knew this person. I knew that person. But she's built her business on being soothing, on being caring. And so I call her my youth treatment, but since I'm scared to go have plastic surgery done, she's my youth thing. So she owns Ageless Perfection Skincare. And so that's one of the people. And then Danette Wicker. Danette is an entrepreneur extraordinaire. She is getting ready to close down for about a month. She does waterless manicures and pedicures, which my husband has to get because he is diabetic. And her business is called Danette's Urban Oasis. And I love a thing about her is that she works around your schedule. She'll come in early, she'll come in late, but she's getting ready to close down so that she can work the stockyard. She has her business is called Danette's Urban Oasis, and she has things that you wouldn't normally see, and most of it says, I'm from Texas. So her biggest thing is to do the stock show in Fort Worth. But like I said, with the waterless manicures and pedicures, she does a lot for people with that, and she does massages. And her big thing is people who have cancer or who are survivors of cancer. She will go to the hospitals and work with you. So those people are some of the people that I would do. And two that I didn't tell you about, and it goes back. I had an uncle, and we were helping him out with some things, and it didn't go quite the way we thought it would. And I remember crying all the way back on the plane from Houston. And I got back and I got on my knees and I was talking to my mom and all of her siblings who are now gone. And they said, baby, y'all did the best you could. And my dad was a cusser. He was not a cursor. He was a cusser. And I started talking to him. And I don't know if I should tell you this, but he said, F it. And I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. They were complete opposites of each other.
But he said it. He just called it out. Yes.
He just said it. You know, they said it in different ways. You know, they said it in different ways. And it was a validation that my cousins and I had done what we could.
Yeah. There's only so much that we can do. And ultimately we back to the whole theme of your story, right? Responsibility to self, responsibility to others. Maricia, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today. So many just great things in there. And I know this is going to resonate with so many people. It's already resonated with me. And already I'm kind of thinking about little parts of your story that I'm going to spend some time thinking about and look at how I can apply it to my story. So
thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show, and we will follow your journey.
Thank you.
What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma, and feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.